I'm hoping that I can at least share my experiences, and hopefully that will give you some insights into how you can deal with imposter syndrome, both as someone who is dealing with it and as someone who is looking to be more welcoming to people who might be dealing with it, especially minorities, women, groups who are underrepresented in tech in one way or another. It's important, I think, to understand both sides of the equation so you know how to be more helpful. I talk to a lot of people who are very interested in making tech more diverse. They just aren't sure how to talk to people or what to do about it. So hopefully we can discuss that a little bit too. But the general pitch was to tell my life story, which I'm going to do, but I promise to leave out some of the less eventful afternoons and just kind of focus on, the summary. So the rumors are true. I am Jennifer Gilbert. I'm going to give you a talk on imposter syndrome, as we have covered. So you guys may have an idea of what imposter syndrome is. I'm just going to give you the definition, just in case you have not discussed it. It's a very big topic in tech. That's a long definition, but the short definition really is just the inability to internalize your accomplishments. So maybe you've written several programs, you've built a web app, you've done all sorts of stuff. And imposter syndrome is essentially the inability to connect those accomplishments to yourself and see them as part of your identity, and instead kind of feel like I'm just tricking everyone all the time. I've written a few web apps, but I got lucky on those, and I'm not going to be able to do it again. So I am qualified to talk about imposter syndrome because I have been a giant fraud for like 20 years, so I have a lot of experience tricking everyone into thinking I'm writing programs and having these accomplishments that I don't personally feel have anything to do with me. So every time I pull one off, I think, okay, I got away with it this time, but next time, who knows what's going to happen. So in this case, for instance, I really feel like I'm at expert levels of imposter syndrome because I have accomplished recursive imposter syndrome, which is imposter syndrome, the feeling that you're not at all qualified to give a speech on your experiences with imposter syndrome. That's where we are right now. So that gives you an idea into how severe the situation is most of the time. So I've kind of moved on to a point in my life where I've been able to ignore it and just kind of go about my business and not let it affect me, but it has definitely been a journey to get there. So just a quick resume about what I do and who I am today. I built the app Cook Smarts in 2012. So that is on the internet now. It is available to help you put together meal plans and learn to cook. It's something that I worked on. It was really my first application that I wrote, and I worked with the founder, Jess Dang, and it was just me and her. I did the back-end work in Ruby and Rails and some of the OPSI sorts of deployment work. So that was a very small company, and that was sort of my first foray into professional programming. I moved on to Aruba Networks, where I just wrapped up a couple years there. Aruba Networks makes Wi-Fi access points, which are those things hanging from the ceiling that you never notice until you work at Aruba Networks. And then everywhere you go, you'll say, oh, that's the kind they have. So Aruba Networks does enterprise-level deployments of Wi-Fi networks. So what I worked on was the software that network professionals can use to control swarms of access points and sort of make them do their bidding and have the configuration they were looking for and gather metrics from those swarms of access points. So in my mind, that kind of looks like this. Like it's pretty exciting. In real life, admittedly, it was a little more like this. But we can go with the top picture because this is my speech. I get to decide which one it is. So I just wrapped that up. I do some volunteer teaching at Railsbridge, which is an organization that does workshops for women, workshops for underrepresented groups in tech. There are free weekend workshops that have free childcare, pretty cool if you're ever looking for something to volunteer at. So I occasionally teach there. I help Chronicle Books with some of their marketing campaigns. They don't have a need for a full-time dev, but I occasionally will pitch in if they need a landing page or something simple along those lines. I am a CS student myself. I'm getting my computer science degree at Oregon State University, one Saturday at a time. It's going to take me forever, but it's worth doing. It's been a lot of fun so far. And I am moving on to start teaching next week at Dev Bootcamp some of the time. So interestingly enough, that's sort of the antithesis of the traditional CS education, kind of a controversial topic. I think there are pros and cons on either side. But I'm excited to get involved with that and hopefully have some say in the conversation about diversity and empathy and a lot of the topics that they're looking to teach there. So if you look at this, there's a lot of logos involved, and you think, okay, you seem to be managing okay, imposter syndrome or no. But the truth is, imposter syndrome has no longer caused me to be unable to do things. You know, I've been able to I still do what I want to do in tech. I feel entitled to technology. I feel entitled to using technology and working in it professionally, but it's still there for sure. And I think as proof of this, there's no better proof than this list, which is the things I used to be bad at. That's not bad. That's from 2012. This is the list of things I'm bad at now. It's not getting better, you guys. I didn't have to, I just sat here and made this list, and you know, it goes on for a little while. So this is kind of the short list of things that I'm needing to work on, that I feel pressure, just internal pressure to get better at, and that I'm excited about. So the thing about imposter syndrome is, you know, especially in technology, it's not like you're ever done, right? With technology, sort of the definition of technology is that it's never over, it keeps on going. And so what I've run into is it's always going to be an issue. There's never going to be a point, you know, when you're over it. So you kind of have to combat it in different ways that I'll get to in a little bit. So yeah, I'm doing fine now at this point. But I have so far, I have lost 90% of my tech career to imposter syndrome. So I've only been coding for a pretty short time. So this is the pie of my life. It's not as exciting as I expected it to look, but it is the pie of my life. Oblivious to the existence of programming, I was busy doing things like learning to use utensils, you know, not a lot of exciting work in those first years. Then you've got what I already talked about, which is hacking, what I've been doing recently. Since 2012, I've been programming. Like, my limiting factor has been like sleep, like basic physical needs that come, that I have to do, and the rest of the time I spend getting better at programming, getting better at understanding all the technologies that are available to me. I've packed a lot in. I had a commute every day of about 40 minutes, and I listened to podcasts on the way there, the way back. Every podcast is like a paradigm shift. It's like I get in my car and you see me like cut to like me getting out of my car, like staggering around, because I just learned about like servers that are so small and fast that they don't boot up until the web request comes in on HTTP. Things that I have not worked with yet that, of course, immediately as soon as I learned it, I say, oh, I want to be better at that. That's something that I want to be really good at. So this black, you know, oblivion section of the pie is me spending about 20 years convinced of my own technical fraudulence and convinced that I did not have a role in tech at all. I didn't learn to program aside from the programs that I wrote as a kid. I didn't major in CS. I didn't really engage with the tech community at all. It isn't somewhere that I felt that I belonged, and I think something that's really dangerous about that is it wasn't an explicit feeling of not belonging. It's not like I was sitting there consciously saying, well, I don't belong in that group, so I shouldn't join. I think that would be easy to overcome if that's something that was, you know, present in your mind. And I think the struggle is that it didn't even occur to me as an option that this is something that I could do. It just, you know, it did cross my mind, oh, I really like programming, I'm really interested in that, but it just never seemed like a real path that I could take. So how did this happen? Like, how can I be so enthusiastic now about programming in my career in tech when I couldn't touch it, you know, for however many years? So to get an idea of how that can happen, we have to go back to a charming era of my life. I want you to know, you can't appreciate it in the picture, but that shirt changes colors when you touch it. Just saying, I was pretty awesome in middle school. So this is me in middle school, and I was introduced to programming just to set the tone for how long ago this was, in case the picture doesn't make it painfully obvious to you. Those glasses were cool back then, I would maintain. We did a programming unit in my computer lab class in junior high, which still shocks me to think about it. I feel like my education in public school in the Midwest had very little technical education. I mean, I think we took maybe like a typing class in high school, but magically in the middle of all of this technical desert, there was this programming course that was a few months long that I took in junior high in BASIC, which, as you can imagine, is very useful today, day to day in my life. And I wrote a diary program that featured a tough-talking cabbie named Eddie, who listened to your problems and responded to them with probably the worst AI in the world because I was like 11. But I was proud of it. It was exciting. I had a lot of fun putting stuff together with code. And I was in love with it, but you have to understand at this time, it's not like you could just go on to Codecademy and learn about programming. If you were going to learn about programming and you wanted to do it on the internet, this is what the internet looked like at that time. So the internet went to Indiana. It wasn't even called the internet yet. And it was available in any color you liked, as long as you liked green or orange. Those were pretty much your options. This was before even you could see images on your computer screen on a regular basis. So I was pretty much on my own here. This wasn't something that I could just, if I felt threatened by the community, I could quietly, get on my computer and figure out programming on my own. That really was not going to be an option. There was no actual internet connection in people's homes until I was graduating high school. So that's not something that I had the choice to do. So I needed a tech scene. I needed to do what a lot of you have probably done naturally, where you're always talking about, with your friends, you're talking about this stuff. It's just an ongoing conversation. There's sort of that background context that you have that you can kind of take for granted until you realize that people on the outside of technology don't get to have that conversation all the time. It's like a fantasy of mine to have 6 girlfriends and we all go out for a drink and we talk about, databases and which one is the best and which one we want to use. That would be awesome. That's something that a lot of people in traditional CS programs, or a lot of people who are more involved in a tech scene, have, and that's not something that they realize how valuable that is. Unfortunately, I did not have that. So I did have a tech scene. This is what it looked like. So none of these women knew C, for one thing. I think it's obvious they had their own problems. Jill of the Jungle doesn't even really have a face, I don't think. We've got Laura over here, who is more a star in my high school career, and I think she's busy fighting hypothermia, judging from, I think tombs are pretty cold and clammy, and nobody gave her a coat, so she wasn't really in a position to help. And then we have, the Metroid situation with Samus, where I will let her off the hook. If you're fighting a giant jellyfish with teeth, I'm not gonna tap you on the shoulder and be like, we need to talk about how much I like programming. So none of this was really an option. So in order to get into technology and have that exchange that I really needed to make my skills better and not just sort of peter out as far as my programming went, I needed to branch out further. And this did not happen. This was sort of the first stop on our tour of imposter syndrome. And apparently it's because I found this too intimidating. So I think nothing says I was an 11-year-old girl like the fact that I was concerned about what is this person going to think of me, and am I going to make a fool of myself? Really, in retrospect, not so intimidating. Probably something I could have gotten over. But at the time, this is sort of the beginning of that experience of not feeling as if I could move forward with that in a very subconscious way, in a way that didn't even feel like a decision that was being made at the top of my mind. And I think that when you're 11, whether you're male or female or whatever, I'm talking about my experiences as a woman with imposter syndrome, but anyone can have imposter syndrome, and being 11 is hard for anyone. You're dealing with a lot, and there was a lot of other stuff, a lot of other questions I was dealing with. Like, am I too old to play with Legos? And, am I an unlovable troll with no redeemable worth as a human being? Like, just the typical 11-year-old questions that, whenever you hit puberty, you have to deal with. So this did not happen. So that was, the first sort of issue. A few years later, I kind of had another opportunity. I could major in CS. I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, which is an excellent technical school. But I thought it was too late for me, which, of course, looking back, an 18-year-old, it is not too late for an 18-year-old to do much of anything. But I was in the Midwest where I think there are voices in the Midwest at that time that would tell you have options, you can do whatever you want. But the prevailing cultural voice is like, of course you have options. Like, you can get married and have 2 kids, or you can get married and have 3 kids. Like, you have so many choices. And I kind of listened to that idea, and it felt like, well, I'm pretty old now, I'm going to get through school, and that's kind of going to be it, right? That's going to be the end of, anything interesting happening to me for the rest of my life. I also was not doing well in math at the time. So I found out later I'm not bad at math, and this was a huge surprise to me. God bless Khan Academy for saving me from math. I'm like in there with the fourth graders, like I'm getting it done and I'm doing a lot of math. Got through algebra, got through all of that stuff and realized I like math. But in high school I had the same math teacher for 3 years out of 4. The 4th year I did not take math. He just wasn't in a position to help me at that time. That's a polite way to put it, but he was there more to sort of coach sports and was not very aware of the idea that I might feel intimidated by math or, you know, might need a little extra help. So yeah, I did think it was too late for me, which, you know, can you blame me? Like, look at that doddering old woman, like, you know, I probably had to set my walker aside just to get that picture taken. So yes, of course it's too late for me, look at me. No future ahead of me at all. So I majored in journalism, which, as you may notice, is not CS at all, and kind of carried on with my life from there. So far this story is like, great, you had really low self-esteem. Like, this isn't a therapy session. Like, you know, what is the relevance of my experience to the tech community at large? Because really, so far, it does sound like a story of, I just didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe in myself for decades on end. I changed my mind, it got better, the end. It's really not that simple, and I think that if I can communicate anything to you, I've had this conversation so many times where now I have a lot of authenticity in tech, and I have tons of programmer friends, and, you know, I'm very accepted, and, you know, none of that is an issue now. And they'll say, what took you so long? You know, it's such a shame that you couldn't do this sooner. But there's still this convenient idea of like, well, some people just don't believe in themselves, and that's really sad for them. And it's a really convenient statement because it removes your responsibility. Responsibility is probably a strong word. Obviously, you don't owe anyone anything. You know, you can live your life and you don't have to reach out. But if you want to be a good community member, you know, if you want to be someone who is active in the tech community, this is absolutely a question that you want to be dealing with. And saying, well, it's just this character flaw that these people have where they don't have any self-esteem. That's a really easy thing to say, and unfortunately it's really just not the whole picture. I want to address the idea of whether it's about confidence. I just want to talk about what I did when I wasn't programming for such a long time and demonstrate that there were a lot of areas that I felt very empowered in and a lot of areas that I felt like I can totally kick ass and it's no problem, and yet I was still very afraid to write a program. So one thing I did was I traveled a lot of places. So I traveled all over the world. I don't know how many countries I've been to, but it's a lot. And in a lot of those countries, nobody spoke the language. You know, you wanted to buy a train ticket, good luck if you don't know what Japanese symbols mean. I was absolutely reliant on the goodwill of other people. I kind of got kidnapped in Thailand for a short time. Lots of adventures, lots of really sort of intimidating things. And some parts of it were scary and some parts of it were really exhilarating. But the point being, I wasn't this like sad sack, you know, sitting at my house, like not brave enough for programming, you know, like this image that people have of these women who just need to believe in themselves, you know. I believed in myself with no problem in various arenas, so I traveled a lot. The other big thing I did that I'm really proud of and that I feel like is such a shocking contrast to how intimidated I felt by technology is that I played roller derby for 3 years. So this is me there. I played roller derby in St. Louis, and if you are not familiar with roller derby, it's kind of just like a big race, but on skates and with some violence thrown in. So it's not the safest thing you could do with your time, as far as that goes. And I played for several years, and then I moved on to whenever I could not play anymore, because roller derby can give you a whole host of physical issues, as you can imagine. So whenever I was sort of physically done with derby, I moved back to my hometown where I hadn't been in probably 5 or 6 years. I rented an apartment over the phone from LA because I was so excited about this idea. And I moved back to Peoria, Illinois to start a league there because a few girls there were interested in starting one but had no idea how to play, had no idea, and I helped build this league from absolutely nothing. So we wrote the derby curriculum, we got a practice space, we booked bouts, we worked with the community. Very, very active, the most work I've ever done in my life, but a lot of fun. And watching people come up to speed and watching women walk in the door and watching them go from people who thought, I really want to do this, but I don't think I can do this, to being these just like rolling like beasts. You know, we joke that like the hemlines just keep getting shorter, like they just keep getting bigger, you know, and watching them have that transformation And I think that experience was a big part of me thinking, this whole like women can't hang in tech thing is nonsense. It is nonsense. If I can teach someone to put wheels on their feet and hit someone else in a strategic way while they're zooming around a track, I'm pretty sure that they can handle technology, provided that we've got more support structures in place. Because roller derby is an area that is very dedicated to support. It's very cognizant of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of, your first day we will talk to you and say you do belong here. And I think that that's something that's missing in tech that we're working on building up and that is getting a lot better. So that's me emceeing about, and I emceed the bout not because I'm a good MC, but because I was literally the only person not playing derby who understood derby. So they're like, you're gonna need a microphone because nobody else knows what's going on. And so I was, again, able to do this. This is a picture of the last game we had before I left home. I moved away after a year, after I felt like they were in good shape and they could carry on without me. It's still going today, 5 years later. This bout raised $30,000 for cancer research. We had 3,000 people come, all through hard work and handing out flyers and all that stuff. I think this is really compelling. This isn't me just like, I've got a room full of you, now I can brag about myself like you're a captive audience. I think this is compelling because I was still a total coward when it came to technology, which just, it's this, I think, contradiction to this myth that we want to believe that, you either have courage or you don't, and you either have what it takes or you don't, and you're either a hard worker or you're not. And if you have all of these things, then you can make it anywhere. And I think it's much more complicated than that. So yeah, to review, I was willing to play a sport where I would wake up in the morning and not be entirely sure that both of my femurs were going to be intact by the end of the day, and that was okay. It was scary, but it was okay. But this was still too much for me. This was still, I don't think I can handle this. Because what if I get in there and I look stupid? God forbid. God forbid I look stupid, because clearly I was not okay doing that any other time. That is a tricycle, if you were wondering. So yeah, I wasn't really concerned about how I looked and whether I was going to look foolish, which again, there's this idea, well, women are just afraid to try, they're just afraid to look foolish. It depends on the context, and it really depends on the amount of support that you have in a community. So it's not me, or at least it's not entirely me. I take ownership over my decisions in my life. Obviously, this isn't this like sob story about how society failed me. I had plenty of opportunities. I didn't take them. I think I do have to take responsibility for that. The only reason I'm not talking about that as much is it's not useful to you to hear about my mistakes and my failings, because you can't do anything about those and they're not relevant to you. So I think what's more interesting to discuss is how I was certainly helped along in my perception that I really maybe didn't belong in technology. This isn't an academic speech. I'm not going to cite a bunch of stuff. If you want to do research, there is so much out there. There's so much to read if you're interested in educating yourself. But just to kind of get a quick, very high-level glimpse. There are a lot of studies out there. There are resume studies where all of the information is the same, and there's a male name or a female name at the top of the resume. The average rating for a female candidate is 3.3, and the average rating for a male candidate is 4. These results and similar results have been repeated all over the place. I think the biggest challenge I have now in all the conversations I have in tech is every day I'm talking to people who are so willing to work on diversity. They are so interested in this subject, they have no idea that this is real, and they have no idea that this is actually happening to the degree that it is. The average starting salary, 26 versus 30. I was talking about this with a coworker not that long ago, and he said, well, okay, that is on women though, because they need to negotiate. Women don't negotiate, men do negotiate. This is true. All of the research done about women in the workplace, men will fight for much higher wages, women won't. A lot of times they don't even counter from whatever the initial offer is. Well, it turns out that women who negotiate their salaries are viewed negatively. It's the social cost of negotiation, which sort of brings us to the idea that there are things that men can do in a workplace, or things that men can do in a conversation, that if women do, it's not viewed the same way. They don't get the same sort of credit for this. And it's not, I'm not here to tell you, it's not this like sob story as far as you can absolutely make it as a woman in technology. you absolutely can. But what's difficult is when a lot of good people who want to help with diversity are not very educated on whether or not it's a fair playing field. All of this, by the way, goes probably double if not triple for race. Like, a black woman trying to get into technology, I cannot even imagine what she's up against in terms of bias. The interruptions, I can tell you, having worked in tech for a few years now, getting 6 words out of my mouth is pretty exciting sometimes. And we all, like the ones who have made it and the ones who are working day to day as programmers, we all kind of get together and we're like, can I get a sentence out? Women are interrupted a lot more than men. And another thing that I did not mention here that happens is that a lot of times there's this, you'll have an idea and you'll voice it and you're in a conference room or you're in some other situation and nobody really answers you. And then somebody else says the same thing about 5 minutes later and they're like, yeah, Steve, like, great idea. And it's something that we all get together and we're just like, why does this happen? And again, it's something that's maybe invisible to someone who has excellent intentions and is very interested in improving technology but just is not aware of what they're up against here. Blind orchestra auditions, this is older, this is from the 90s, but it's one of my favorite stories because it's just really compelling. For a long time, women did not make it into orchestras, at least I think it was like 10% maybe, not very many. And whenever conductors were asked about it, they would give these answers. You're talking about music, so obviously it's somewhat subjective, but they would say they're just not as good, we're trying to let them in. So blind orchestra auditions were something that were started in the 90s. Immediately, the number of women went up 30%. But what's interesting is it went up even higher once they had people audition in their socks. Because what was happening is they could still hear the footwear of the person walking in. And so they had to say, okay, take your shoes off. So to me, that's crazy that they would say, okay, before you play the violin for these people, we're going to hang this sheet up and then take your shoes off and you can play. And it had a huge impact. And what's really compelling about that story is not that that's true, because believe me, once you get out in the workforce, none of this will surprise you. It's much more that the judges themselves were appalled, because nobody thinks, like, nobody gets out of bed and is like, I can't wait to discriminate today, like, this is going to be great, I'm going to be a horrible person. That's no one's goal, that's not what anyone is trying to do, and a lot of bias is subconscious, and if you think I'm trying to make men feel bad, women are exactly right up there, that women will reject a female resume just as often. So this is something that is very pervasive. It's not just like a man versus woman problem, it's an undervaluing of women in general and their professional skills. They're often seen as less credible. This is a really depressing set of studies if you ever want to get into this. Expert testimony, if it's female, is often not taken as credible by jurors. News anchors, broadcasters, especially sports broadcasters for reasons that may be obvious. Medical patients, this is a depressing one. So I read a few studies about the sort of all this effort that women put in when they go to the doctor to not seem crazy. Like, where they have symptoms and they'll sort of coach themselves, like, okay, like, I'm not going to seem like a hypochondriac, I'm just going to go in there and I'm just going to talk about what's wrong with me. And because there's always that threat of, well, maybe you're just, like, hysterical. Like, are you sure it's not in your head? And that's something that they're dealing with as well. So there's this whole realm going on that I think there's so much awareness coming out now and there's so many good conversations happening. So I'm really not here with any incredible new ideas. It's great that it's going in this direction, and I think it's a very real situation. So staying in a female-dominated industry, I don't know that you could call roller derby a female-dominated industry, but I'm hoping with these ideas that I've given you, maybe it makes a little more sense that I'm not even willing to dip a toe into technology, but I'm willing to get in there and start a grassroots roller derby league, shake hands with the mayor, talk to whoever I need to talk to, plan this huge event where we're worried about refreshments and freaking out about, restrooms and how we're going to deal with these crowds of people. I was willing to do that, and I was still too intimidated to write a function, to look at linear algebra, things that at this point are pretty clearly, within my grasp if it's something that I want to do. So how did I get over it? And this is a really inconvenient part of the story, but it's the truth. I want to tell you that I just woke up one day and sort of came to my senses and said, this is ridiculous, I can do whatever I want to do, and this is what I'm going to do. I did quit my job to become a programmer. I quit my job, I was an editor at Living Social, and I quit and studied for several months, as much as I could, just to get an internship, just to get in the door. And I got an internship at Aruba Networks, which was really hilarious, where they said, okay, we're gonna let you program, we're not gonna pay you very much, we're gonna let you program about half the day, and the other half of the day you're gonna unbox access points. So those access points hanging from the ceiling, I would be given this like giant pile of them, and I would be given these bins for like all the 12 parts that are in the box. They'd be like, okay, put each part in each of these bins, and that's what I did, and that was the deal, because I had no proven technical skills. I had nothing on my resume besides I built Cook Smarts with a friend, and I just needed to get in the door. And from there it went really well. But the thing is, I didn't do it by myself, and I think this is like the most painful thing to say as a feminist, but it's the truth, and I think it's the truth for a lot of women. I got over it because if you remember this young gentleman, he became the president of the computer club. He grew up a few miles away from me. I did not meet him until I was older, but I ended up marrying him whenever he had grown up a little and had gotten rid of the glasses. This is awful, right? Like, you're gonna come up here as a feminist and be like, well, then I put on a pretty dress and I married someone and then it was okay, like it all worked out. The thing is, it's not about, this is not the solution, clearly, it doesn't scale very well. It's not about marrying someone in technology, it's about having access to the technical community through someone that you trust. That's a completely different thing. And that's what I had for the first time ever. I had someone I could ask all my questions to, if I got stuck, which is, it's always horrible when you're new and you're just learning to debug, and it's, you don't believe already, you already think, I can't do this, what am I even doing? And the minute you hit this really difficult bug, it's hard not to give up, if you don't have help. And what I needed was that conversation, the one that I mentioned earlier, where you get to sit down and you get to have beers and talk about databases. That's what we do now, and that's something that I was able to do. Unfortunately, a lot of women I've met who are like me, we have a lot of meetups and things to talk about our careers, and a lot of us are from non-traditional backgrounds where we didn't major in CS. This is the case for a lot of them, where they say, well, my boyfriend was a programmer, or my husband, and that's such a sad idea to me. I don't want technology to only be accessible to imposter syndrome sufferers who are lucky enough, to have this access to technology. So I think my main goal, and something I try to do, is be that person for other people. I don't even make them marry me. I just say, call me if you get stuck. I don't care that I just met you. I'm here for you, and make sure that they have that. And I think the more people who are doing that and the more welcoming the tech community is, the better. I don't think people are not offering that because they're horrible people. I think they feel comfortable with technology. I think most of you are going to feel pretty comfortable debugging a program. It doesn't occur to you, that somebody else may be really struggling or may kind of need a little push in that way. So how to help in this situation? Again, if I really knew, I would be on Oprah. I would be like way too cool for any of you. I would just be like on my yacht with my butler, but that has not happened. Maybe I'll come up with the formula at some point. Some suggestions though. The first suggestion is to relax, especially if you're on the other side of this conversation. This is hard. I think whenever you are advocating for women in technology, there's a kickback where people are really resistant to the idea. They think you're saying they're doing something wrong, or if you say, well, you were in a position of privilege, they think that means you're devaluing the work that they've done, because no one gets through computer science without hard work, obviously. And I think that no one's saying that, for one thing, or if they are, I certainly do not agree with them, and that's not a position that I represent. And the other thing is, I think it's interpreted at this moment of like, are you in or are you out? Like, you can either abandon all of your male programmer friends and come with us, or you're dead to us and we're enemies. And that's not the situation. If you aren't sure how you feel about this stuff, if you have opinions that are different than what I've been talking about here, there's no rush to figure this out. And I think a lot of times just chilling out and having the conversation instead of having that immediate sort of nasty reaction. A lot of times when I say I volunteer at Railsbridge, they'll say, oh yeah, because that's not discrimination. I think that's a valid question. Do you have concerns that this is reverse discrimination? Do you have, let's have that conversation. I don't necessarily think that that's an invalid viewpoint, but I think when you kind of have that reaction of just like someone has burnt you with something, you're not in a position to have a good conversation about it. There's nothing wrong, just because you're not objecting violently. I'm not assuming we're like twinsies now and you're on my side and we both love Railsbridge, You're welcome to have a more rational conversation, and I think there's a lot of defensiveness around the issue. Ask questions. This is my favorite tip, because a lot of people that I'm talking to, they sort of come from these assumptions and they'll say, well, there's no reason why women can't just confront their coworkers one-on-one. Because it's a big issue where there's this fear that if we hire women, they're going to go to HR and it's going to cause this huge mess over any incident because women don't like confrontation and they're not going to confront their coworkers one-on-one. I've had this conversation at dining parties, I've had this conversation at bars, I've had it everywhere, even among people who are trying to help with diversity, where they say, okay, to be fair, women really need to step it up and be willing to talk to someone one-on-one and have that, kind of bro conversation of like, hey, knock it off, I don't like that, and just kind of move on from there. The thing is, if you are willing to ask a question, it's so much more welcoming than if you just say, well, there's no reason that a woman can't do that. Because immediately I'm thinking, really? You're the expert now. Like, you know what it's like to be me, you know what it's like to be anyone. All you have to do, even if that's your feeling, is just say, so why don't women sometimes feel comfortable with one-on-one conflicts? That sounds a million times better, and you really didn't say anything different. But you're also saying, hey, I'm open to talking about this. And then I will explain there are a lot of incidents in the workplace that you don't see because people who harass other people aren't really that stupid. They're not going to harass someone in front of you. They're not going to, I've had ugly things muttered to me in passing that I know was out of earshot for a reason. I'm not going to confront that person one-on-one in a closed office. I don't think any sane person would. And I think a lot of times if you don't have that context, it sounds wimpy, right? Like, oh, you're just afraid of difficult conversations, without understanding that some of the treatment that has been experienced is not anything you would ever do as a nice person, and sort of beyond your imagination as far as the, discomfort level that can come up. Call out bias when you see it. Once you have read about interviews, especially job interviews in tech are very, very gendered. And this is something that's difficult. I was interviewing 2 candidates, and one candidate gave the sort of cowboy answer. We said, what is a RESTful API? How does that work? Just kind of a general question. And he jumped right in and very bravely, had no idea what he was talking about, but made sure that he started talking immediately and said, well, the thing about RESTful APIs is, and it took us 30 seconds to realize this guy had no idea what he was talking about. But it was an internship. It was like, we don't really expect you to know what you're talking about. We just want to know where you are and where we might place you, and it's a pretty forgiving interview. So just because that happened, it didn't mean, we're not going to hire this guy. The other candidate, a woman, said, I don't know. And she got marked down for that considerably more than he did. And it's not intentional. It's not that anyone said, they said, well, she said she didn't know. And I said, well, this other guy didn't know either. Just because he wasn't willing to say so does not mean he had any more technical knowledge. People are not deliberately having that gender bias, but filtering for just technical knowledge versus how it's expressed. How many times someone said or like when they were trying to describe it. How certain they seemed of their answer. Anytime they're rating each other, if you let 2 people self-rate themselves, imposter syndrome, other factors like that can really affect how they rate themselves. And one person might say they're a 3, and another person might say they're a 7, and really they're at about the same level. This happens all the time. In job interviews, I will hear someone say, well, she talked too much. And I'll think, that's what nervous ladies do, man. But they're not necessarily very aware of that. And so it's this idea of like, I think she's like unstable because she talked a lot in this interview. Etsy is a company that has done a lot of work on gender bias in interviews, and I really recommend that you take a look at some of what they've done. It's so interesting. They made a commitment to increasing their staff, the diversity of their staff, without lowering the bar. If you're not aware, if you're not reading research, you're not going to know this stuff is going on. It's not obvious to you, just sort of walking around. Be vulnerable. I cannot tell you how few coworkers I have who are willing to say, I don't know, or I'm bad at that. I think there's this idea of like, you need to be like a technical superstar at all times. And of course, if you have imposter syndrome, you're not as likely to say that, and you're much more likely to say, I have no idea what I'm doing. Sometimes there's a lot to be said for just hearing someone else say, I have no idea what I'm doing. It makes you feel better. Obviously you don't have to make it up if it's not true, but surely there are times you're a little bit out of your depth and you're afraid to admit that. I think a lot of times for imposter syndrome, when people are getting together and realizing lots of people have this feeling, men have this feeling, women have this feeling, if it's being discussed, I think that can be helpful. Be humble, sort of the same idea. It's okay to not know everything. Maybe you don't know why women wouldn't want to confront someone one-on-one, or maybe you don't know why they don't apply for jobs. Ask. Assume you don't know. It's easy to be smart. NCS, we're all smart, and we're used to knowing what we're talking about, and I think sometimes we just forget that, we aren't anthropologists, we aren't psychologists. We're not always, none of us is an expert on this subject, and none of us knows everything. Help yourself if you're someone struggling with this. And again, obviously I'm talking from a feminine perspective, but men deal with this as well. It's just the experience that I have. That's why that's my perspective, but I don't mean to discount anyone else's experience. Don't take all the blame. There are a lot of factors that can tell you that you are not cut out for a career or that you don't belong somewhere. I had conversations all the time when I was growing up where I know one time someone asked me what I like to do, and I said I like to read. And I was a receptionist at a law firm at this time, and I was in school. I said, I like to read. And he said, oh, like Twilight? And I was like, no, more like Myth of Sisyphus, actually. That's what I'm reading right now. But that whole implication of, you probably like Twilight. There is nothing wrong with liking Twilight. The problem is that societal expectation of, if you're reading, that must be what you mean. You must be reading about, sexy vampires. That's probably what you're spending your time on. Set concrete goals. It doesn't matter how you feel about yourself or what you perceive about yourself. You as a technical person can easily recognize when you have met a goal, right? As long as your specs are clear, which is great software engineering anyway, as long as you know what you're aiming for, who cares what you think about it? The point is that you managed to make an app or make whatever you were trying to make, and it did what you wanted it to do. My first program when I was still a manuscript editor was a productivity program that increased my revenue by 20%. It was terrible, but it did what I needed it to do. It gave me a little bit of confidence. If you know what you're aiming for and you have that goal, it's a lot easier, I think, to sort of quiet this idea of you don't know what you're doing. As long as you know what the next step is, that's all you need to know. Explore low-risk options. I wish I had these. Go on Codecademy, do whatever you need to do. Obviously, you're in an educational setting where you're not worried about this, so it's more about encouraging other people to explore these options, because there's all this, a lot of times when you are used to technology and you're used to talking about technology, you think people who are scared to come to a meetup are babies, and you're kind of like, oh, come on, it'll be really fun. If someone's not comfortable doing that, they're probably in a perspective that maybe you can't empathize with. Give them other options, make sure that they're educated on what they can do. You can do an amazing amount from your house at this stage that I wish that I had had access to whenever I was kind of afraid to get involved. Connect with others like you. There are all kinds of meetups, all kinds of areas where if you are insecure and you have some issues there where you can go to learn, you can go to study, or if you're in a position to help, you can teach, you can volunteer to be an instructor, you can mentor. There are some great mentorship programs. You may feel like I'm still a student, I don't know that I have a lot to offer. Trust me, you do. There are people who are still learning just what a database even does, how it even works. Remember your rights. This is actually what got me over the hump in the end. Remembering you have a right to be here, you have a right to be in technology, and there's no minimum bar for skills. There's no flunking technology. If you want to sit on your computer and write the world's most horrible programs for the rest of your life, you're not taking anything away from anyone else. It's like there's not some person who's going to get denied a Python distribution because you put it on your machine. It's one of the most accessible things out there. It's one of the most affordable things out there. And I think for a long time I thought there was some standard of admission or someone needed to tell me that it was fine that I was there. Everyone has a right to technology. Everyone has a role in technology, even if that role is I write bad programs. It's fine. It's fine if that's where you are, and that's where everyone starts. So it needs to be okay to be that person. Imperfection is not an emergency on either side. I think for a long time I thought, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to be able to do this, and you can have all kinds of flaws, and you can still look at them as opportunities. It's so exciting that there's always somewhere to get better. It's so exciting that I had that gigantic long list that I'm never going to be done with before I am dead, because it means that life is going to be interesting, and life is going to be full of accomplishments and milestones that took me a long time to reach. And it's funny that I ever thought that that was some terrifying concept, because I think the alternative would be pretty boring. So I hope I've given you some idea of how to sort of take those imperfections that are everywhere in tech and see them as opportunities to hopefully make something a little bit better, either for yourself or for someone else. Thank you. I've been told there might be questions. Wherever I've ever dealt with in a workplace, it was pretty extreme to be honest. So yeah, there are a lot of parallels. I don't have data for you as far as how much worse it is in law than anywhere else. I know that advancement is rough. I know that they have the concept of a pipeline, sort of the same idea that people talk about in tech with diversity. And I know that it's definitely kind of a bros club in a way that is hard to break into. I was a legal assistant who also answered the phone and sat at a desk in the front, and I was kind of out there with captive audiences. You know, I had to talk to people, I had to be nice to people, and a lot of the harassment that I saw at the hands of these lawyers who kind of thought they owned the world and, you know, had really nice cars, and it's difficult. I think law is a tough field for women as well. STEM, law, just like anything that's male dominated, I think a lot of times there's a culture there that is just not very aware of itself, is probably the best way to say it. And just a little behind the times in terms of what counts as harassment or what's appropriate to say to someone in the workplace.
How is it stepping in for someone in your job at Aruba? Like, I can imagine it being kind of intimidating, not having like that's like your first like experience.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
It was how did I feel stepping into my job at Aruba whenever I first got there. It was very intimidating, and I thought about a lot of things about myself that I had never really noticed before, where it's like, man, am I like always playing with my hair? Like I'm always playing with it because nobody else has that situation. I've actually written about this a little bit, about how even something like needing to like apply lip gloss or something, the fact that I ate a salad for lunch every day and got made fun of for it every day because they could kind of eat whatever they wanted and I was not in that position. I did feel like an outsider, and there were a lot of situations that I ran into where they would say, stop apologizing so much. You know, you apologize all the time, which is something that women do a lot more frequently than men. I personally think it's nice to apologize if you think that you've done something wrong, or even if someone's they say, oh, I'm having a really bad day, and I'll say, oh, I'm sorry. And they'll say, well, it's not your fault. And they would be very annoyed with me that I had expressed that sympathy. And I thought, man, this has to be one of the only realms where people are like, I don't want your nice feelings. Like, so I had to learn to sort of tone that down. It was definitely awkward being the only woman in the room ever at most of the meetings I was in. It's funny because Aruba is actually a great place for women to work. They just don't. You know, it's a very male-dominated area, but they actually are probably one of the most fair workplaces I've ever been in. I felt very safe there. You know, I didn't have any issues like that. But I did feel very, very odd frequently, you know, where I'd have my badge and they'd say, why don't you just put it in your wallet? And I'd say, I don't really have like a lady wallet. Like, that's not really how it works. I'm wearing a dress, there's nowhere to put it. And those little differences, they're so small, and you know, and if you didn't have a lot of insecurity about your abilities, maybe they wouldn't matter to you. But I think when you're already dealing with a lot of self-doubt, it can definitely exacerbate the situation. And I also think that each little incident is fine, and you think, well, who cares? You didn't have a wallet, why is that a problem? But when that's your day, every day, you know, having several conversations like that an hour, I think that can start to wear on you, and it can definitely make you feel like you're different and like you're an outsider. And that's something that by the time I left Aruba, I didn't even notice. We were just kind of, it felt like we were all the same. But at first, I was like, man, guys talk about their cell phones more than anything. I had no idea. Every time we would go to lunch, we would all be sitting around a table, and they'd be like, so which phone do you have? Like Android or iOS? You know, this is like the endless conversation. And I'm thinking, man, can we like gossip about somebody? This is not interesting. Like, I feel like people make fun of women for gossiping, and you know, and I'm like, that's because it's way more awesome of a conversation than what you're doing right now. So yeah, I would tease them about it, and I had like this old terrible phone, and when I finally got a new phone, I was so excited to walk in and like hold it up. I'm the cool one, like for once in my life, and I was the cool one for like 48 hours, and then someone got a better one, but for that one day, I really fit in. So it was definitely a struggle, but I will say it does go away. So if you find yourself in a workplace, you may be around a lot of women now, you may join a workplace where you're not. I really was the only one on my team. It does get better. It's something that you just stop noticing after a while. It's really more about your lack of confidence sort of amplifying those exchanges and making them scarier than they really are, I think.
Did you want to like major in journalism at first? Was it like because the STEM fields were too intimidating at the time, or did you like actually want to do journalism more than CS?
So I had a lot of writing talent, I had a lot of editing talent, and what I really wanted to be, since I had this whole slew of spelling bee trophies that I wasn't doing anything with, And I found out that editing was a profession, and I was shocked. I was just like, someone's gonna pay me to fix typos. That's a thing that I could do. And I was so, I had this idea that your job as someone majoring in college, I thought that my job was to find the path of least resistance to make a living, which is so depressing to me now. But at the time, I had so much insecurity that I thought all I need to do is find the thing that I know I can do. I was already good at it. I didn't even really need, to be an editor. I got a lot of good journalism education, but to fix typos, I could already do that. I thought that was my job. I didn't think it was my job to find a career that would challenge me. Whenever I was that age, I didn't think, well, I'm going to get bored in 10 years. And that's exactly what happened. After I edited for 7 or 8 years, I was like a human Photoshop filter at that point. Like, there was not a typo or grammar problem that I had not seen and had not fixed, and it felt very robotic at that time. But hard work is awesome, and accomplishing stuff is awesome. And when I was 18, I didn't understand that at all. I was very afraid of challenges, and I was very afraid of suffering in a way that is actually the best feeling. Anyone here who's suffered through a bug, when you fix that bug, is there anything better in the entire world? Like, you want to call everyone you know, not that they would care, be like, I found it, you guys. Like, it was, and your mom's like, cool. Like, I don't really know what you're talking about. It's 3 in the morning, but you're so excited to have gotten there. I really cheated myself out of that due to a lack of self-confidence that I do take responsibility for. But again, I was not exactly in an environment that was contradicting me. In terms of saying, oh, of course you could do that, or maybe you should push yourself a little more. That's not something that was really happening either. And I had struggled so much with math that I kind of thought there's no way I was going to survive a CS program, which may or may not have been true, but the math was very scary for me at the time. I'm now happily surviving calculus. I'm in a calculus class right now. I'm not going to say it's easy for me, but I'm getting it done and it's fine. And I think that I could have then as well.
Can you talk about your experience in the industry with like racial minorities, and also maybe the intersectionality of being a gender minority and also being a racial minority?
The second part I can speak to. Racial minorities, certain ones are very present to the point that they're not minorities. So almost everyone I worked with in Sunnyvale was Indian. So technically they're a racial minority, but in tech and in that environment they're not. It's much more the majority. I think the most interesting thing I found from being the only white person in the room and the only woman in the room is that I was never worried about being the only white person in the room. So a lot of people want to write off some of the gender issues in tech as, well, you're just different, and of course that's tiring, and of course that's hard, but that's not our fault, Just because you're different, what are we supposed to do about that? And I think there's more to it than that, as evidenced by the fact that I never walked in and said, oh God, I'm the only white person, like this is, oh, I'm so nervous, That wasn't an issue because I understood that I was more privileged than anyone, and it wasn't, you felt like, if anything, you were almost apologetic, about the fact that you knew you had advantages, and that wasn't true for gender. So I think that was a really sort of satisfying experience for me to realize, no, it's not just about being different. It's not just that I have to push my bangs out of my eyes and I'm wearing a dress that I have to tug on and I feel weird and awkward in this environment. It is about being different and knowing that I am in a less valued demographic and a less privileged demographic. Because the race issue just never was an issue for me, to the point that I didn't even think of that until later and thought, that's really funny, that never bothered me.
Yeah, I think I was referring to more specifically the racial minorities in this field. So not white, not East Asian, not South Asian, but more so Black and Latino, Chicano folks, and your experiences on that.
My biggest experience is I have not met any. So I do meet them as beginners. So in Railsbridge we have plenty. We have, I would say more Latino than Black, but well attended, in a diverse way. What really frustrates me is the lack of support for intermediate developers who are outside the system, who are outside of a CS major. Beginners, it's great. You can sit them down, everybody feels great, they all get a snack, we build a web page, everybody has a great time, and you can make that a really positive experience for them. And I see plenty of them at that level. What really scares me is that they don't make it to the higher levels, at least that I have seen. I do not personally know a racial minority developer who is female, at least. I know a few men who, I think they can speak on the fact that sometimes they feel really privileged and sometimes they don't. They have that confusing experience of, saying, okay, sometimes this works for me, in my favor, and sometimes it doesn't. But no, very little interaction, and I wish that were better. I do meet them at the beginner level. I try to be really encouraging, and I try try to make sure they know I'm always available to them. But I know you were asking, you know, do you know anyone who would be able to speak? And I hated to say no, you know, where I have not met them. And this is somebody who is interested in diversity, so it's a big problem for sure. I think racial minorities are an even bigger problem because I think women are it's a more visible issue. It's something that you're reading about a lot, right? Like any sort of tech publication, TechCrunch, whoever, they have articles about women in tech that I think are pretty well thought out, and I feel like the racial minority issue is not being addressed to nearly the same degree. Railsbridge does have a few, I think, for them now.
Thank you.
What is your husband's perspective on the issues you face, and how do you think, like, how does he support you emotionally, and how do you think guys should do anything different?
I think a lot of what I've talked about is stuff that he's internalized. I always like proudly say like what a good feminist he is. But when he goes to work, he works at Twitch, and that is generally, Twitch, everybody loves Twitch. I knew that would be a popular statement. And that is a very male workforce, that's a very young workforce, and Twitch is working on diversity as much as anyone. And I do catch him, you know, saying things like, it's about context. Like, you have to understand that this is about context. So he's really good about making sure that I'm visible. He is very proud, and anytime I go to Twitch, they say, oh, I heard you're messing with CouchDB now, you know. So it's obvious that he makes sure that I'm represented and that I'm visible. In terms of helping me, I tried really hard to do as much on my own as I could. Obviously, it wasn't like I was gonna be able to bring him with me all the time, and it was embarrassing for me as someone who does have a lot of pride. I didn't wanna be like, oh, some guy is helping me, you know, do my programming homework. But he just was there to help me out of the really difficult bugs that required a level of knowledge I just didn't have. I think there are factors sometimes you're just not aware that this is a common issue, you know, with Internet Explorer, or this is a common problem that you might run into. Very helpful with that. He's DevOps, so he always helps me on the DevOps side as well. I think the biggest thing though was just I trust him, and his opinion that I could do it, even though it sounds really cheesy, and again, I cringe that this is the story, but knowing someone in the tech community that you trust, that you have a good rapport with, who says, oh no, you got this, it's no problem, that's worth a lot. And I try to make sure that I give that message to other people who maybe need to hear it, and it's so simple, and it doesn't seem like something that matters that much, but when you're on the outside and tech seems like this wizardry that's just so mysterious to you, it really is worth something, you know, to have somebody tell you, oh yeah, you could handle that, you know, no problem. And once I got into it, you know, he made sure that if I was having a bad day, you know, he had stories, oh, I remember this one time I spent 12 hours debugging the fact that I had like the wrong file name, you know, something really stupid, and it just makes you feel better to know you are not the only person who's ever been brought down by like, oh, one typo. One typo can ruin your whole day, really. I don't think I'm going to work at NASA anytime soon, let's put it that way. I brought our entire office to a halt once because of one S. I just kind of like skulked in and fixed it. Like, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so whenever I tell him that, he usually tells me about the time he almost destroyed, you know, 100 servers because he, you know, just ran the wrong command or was in production and thought he was in test or whatever. And this isn't a husband role, right? I mean, anyone that you know, if you are good friends and you're in technology, that is something they could do for you. I don't think his role in my life necessarily had to be what it was for him to do that successfully. And I've heard, oh, yeah.
I have another question. I think a lot of race and gender literature talks about how things like patriarchy not only exist at individual levels, but are kind of encouraged culture, and that minorities or people of color who end up making it to management positions end up encourage some of that within themselves. Did you realize the difference between women or people of color who manage management positions, and did they replicate the same type of problematic, you know, patriarchal features that expressed to other people, or were they different in your actions?
I don't know very many, unfortunately. It's the same sad situation where I say, well, I don't really know a lot of black developers. I don't know very many. I will say that in my experience, management level, they have to internalize some of it. And I think that I do too. I think that if I saw someone walk in today behaving the way I behaved when I got there, I would be like, get it together. Like, why are you kind of like this cowardly lady person? Like, I don't understand. It is really sad, but you culturally, I have to really be careful not to offend my friends now, because dudes just say it like it is pretty much most of the time, and if I don't like what they're doing, I'll be like, hey, knock it off, not cool, whatever, and it's no problem for us to deal with it that way. If I don't context switch properly, I can really hurt people's feelings, you know, where where they say, does this look good? And I'm like, no. And men want you to do this for them. Like, they're like, these shoes, how are they? And I'm like, like, and they're happy with that, and you know, that's something that they want. And I know I've internalized it, so I guess by extension, if you want to interpolate that a little further, I can't imagine you would make it in management and be absorbed in this culture without at least internalizing some of it. I think everybody has biases. We all have biases. I am convinced I would fail a gender study as much as anyone else. I mean, if science has shown anything, it's that we all kind of have these deep-seated beliefs. But for sure, I think if you're going to make it in the industry right now, you have to internalize some of that culture. I don't think anyone's going to respect you otherwise, and that's unfortunate. I think that there's nothing wrong with respecting someone who is kind and articulate and says they're sorry when you're having a bad day, but the truth is a lot of people who succeed learn to pare that out of their language and learn to speak more professionally, which is really more just masculine, I would say. It is getting better, for what it's worth. I think it's such a depressing thing to look into sometimes, but there's so much effort. I know so many people who are doing such great things to make this better. So I think awareness is the biggest thing. All right, we have snacks, I believe, if there are no more questions. And